Hey there, Jason Shepard here of M0A.com, and I want to introduce my very good friend and partner in aviation mastery, Gary Reeves. These seminars, by the way, are brought to you by our good friends from Avemco Insurance Company, and they make all of these FAA safety seminars really happen. Let's talk about our speaker, Gary Reeves. Gary is truly the expert in all things single pilot IFR, and really the entire avionics suite behind it. When we upgraded 2-3 Mike Zulu, Gary is the person we went to help us with our entire new panel. Gary is an expert in Genesis Autopilots, ForeFlight, Avidyne, Garmin, and so many other avionics suites as well. Gary has over 7,500 flight hours. He's an airline transport pilot, a master flight instructor, instrument instructor, and multi-engine instructor. So what does that mean to be a master flight instructor? Let me put it into perspective for you. There's 112,000 flight instructors in the United States, yet less than 800 master flight instructors. That puts Gary into a pretty special category there. Gary has provided his 3-day Mastering IFR programs to aircraft owners in over 30 states, including one of them, us, here in Ocala, Florida, where we're located. Gary is also the national training provider for 2 huge names in aviation, those being Avidyne and Genesis Autopilots. He's their exclusive national training provider. So it's without further ado, I introduce to you the guy in the pink shirt, the 2019 National Flight Instructor of the Year, my good friend, Gary Reeves.
That just gets funnier every time I see it. So thanks not only to Avemco, which has always supported our FAA safety free webinars, we've also been very lucky to be supported by Genesis Aerosystems. And Genesis is the S-TEC Autopilot brand. And they are supporting a bunch of free webinars this month. We certainly appreciate it. The 3100 is the digital 3-axis autopilot. The S-TEC 55X is a rate-based 2-axis autopilot. You can add the 3rd axis. You can add yaw damper, but it comes included in the 3100. So, and I actually have a 55X in my airplane. I think they're great. So one of the biggest favors I can ask y'all is to consider joining the FAA safety team. A really common thing I hear at all the conventions that I talk at is, well, I'd join, but I'm not an instructor. Don't care. You never had to be an instructor to join the FAST team. It's mostly a volunteer group. There's very few paid FAA staff on the team. It's mostly volunteers, and you've never had to be an instructor. All you got to do to be a great FAA safety team member is just care about keeping little airplane crashes off the evening news. So if that appeals to you, we would encourage you to go to FAAsafety.gov and apply to join us. We would certainly love the help. This is absolutely a very generic video. There's no possible way I can cover every specific autopilot, avionics, and aircraft configuration, and I'm not going to try. That's not the point of this video. These are general principles only. I will answer some questions submitted by the audience earlier, but they are general principles only, and you really, really need to get expert training in your airplane with your autopilot, in your avionics with your configuration. That's really what will make you great. So consider yourself warned, and I will go on. Objectives. This is what I'm going to cover today. The primacy myths, including something called autopilot dependency, how to use autopilots on SID stars, GPS approach notes, how to use ILS LPV approaches on an autopilot, some important notes about using autopilots on VOR, Localizer, and back course approaches, some important limitations and when autopilots are prohibited, quiz, and then I'm going to randomly answer some questions that the audience submitted earlier in the live presentation. I do apologize if my voice goes in and out a little bit. I am in Texas. It is spring and the allergies are absolutely killing me. I live on 2.5 acres and everything is blowing pollen in me. And I think they're flowers. My wife calls them weed. But anyway, if my voice goes in and out, that's what's going on. So what is primacy? Well, primacy is a law of learning, and it's true in all learning, but it seems to be most dangerous in aviation. So the law of primacy says this: if you were taught something first, you will think it's always true and you will go on to teach others, even if we show you later that it's false. In fact, if we confront what you think you know, because that's what you were taught, you can have a rather severe emotional reaction. So let me ask you a question. Is a different way than what you were taught first wrong, or is it just different? Now, anybody listening to this video is open-minded and would accept this. Not everybody does. Let's talk about some really popular myths. Red light's good for night vision. Okay, no, wrong. It's always been wrong. It was a myth from World War II. Red light, green light, blue light in the cockpit are all utter garbage. Any colored light interferes with night vision. Your night vision is part of the fovea, the rods and cones. They need white light. So anytime you're a pilot like me, who I've been a pilot for over 20 years, and I have like 800 red flashlights that I bought at conventions and sporties and aircraft sprues, and all these people are really well intentioned, but it's utter garbage. We need to stop teaching that. The only correct light, and it's been proven over and over in medical studies, is only white. Go into any new certified aircraft and all the panel lighting is white. None of that red garbage. This is another popular myth. You should drop your gear at the glide slope. It's been taught that way for years. It came out of the two-pilot cruise because two pilots don't often gear up landing because one person can monitor the gear. I don't think this is true. I don't recommend you wait until you're on short final VFR to drop your gear. I think you should drop your gear before turning final. I don't think you should drop your gear at the final approach fix and IMC at the end of a 2.5 hour flight when you're tired and not going to notice the gear's not down. I actually have proof. I have many accident reports where people dropped the gear at the final approach fix and landed gear up. Now remember, I talked about that emotional response. No kidding, I taught this. I prefer to drop the gear 5 miles before the initial approach fix because it's a speed reduction device. The term speed reduction came from my friend at Peter King at Epic. Hey, Pete. But I dropped my gear early to slow everything down, to guarantee my gear is down before I start the approach. And by slowing down the instrument approach speed, I have more time to make those critical decisions when I'm most tired. Taught this at a major owners group, and the head of the safety committee, who's also a designated pilot examiner, absolutely lost his mind, got totally triggered, visibly upset, and in the hallway later told me that I can't teach that because if people drop the gear before the initial approach fix, that they're going to see an increase in stall spin accidents. What? How is dropping the gear early and stabilizing the plane more going to cause that plane to flip upside down and stall spin? Well, it's not, but it violated what he had been taught, and he had an emotional reaction. And this is from a really smart guy, but all he could see is I was wrong and dangerous. So be open-minded to new ideas. And the thing I really want to talk about today is I see so many magazine articles and so many really smart public speakers and on TV and social media saying accidents are caused by autopilot dependency. It's children of the pink line. Hey, leave pink alone. This is Gary in the pink shirt. Leave pink out of it. But it's caused by autopilot dependency and pilots should hand fly more. That's totally false. That is a false to fact statement, folks. I know that people, when they hear that, they get this emotional trigger like, oh, yes, it's true. They should hand fly more. No, I will flat out tell you, my opinion only, but backed up with some really good science, that people should hand fly less. Accidents are not caused by the autopilots. Accidents are caused by fatigue and one particular type of fatigue. So this is straight out of the FAA. I don't make these numbers up. This is right off the FAA. When are most accidents? Well, they're during final approach and landing, which kind of makes sense. When is workload highest? When do you have to make the most decisions the fastest? Final approach and landing. Well, it matches up with the accidents real well. And when is fatigue highest? When are you most tired? At the beginning of a 2.5 hour flight, in the middle of a 2 hour flight, or at the very end when workload is highest? Well, fatigue, workload, and accidents are always going to line up just like that. And what's really interesting here is the fatigue is not so much physical fatigue. That's definitely a contributing factor. The biggest cause of accidents is actually something called decision fatigue. So decision fatigue is something in decision making and psychology. The term decision fatigue refers to the deteriorating quality of decisions made by an individual after a long session of decision making. Sorry, a little bit of a geek. I like to read studies. But let me actually just make it very, very simple. If the human brain is a battery, after 10 decisions in a row, your ability to make the number 11th or the next decision is down a little bit. The more decisions you make, the poorer the quality happens. So after 10 decisions, your decisions start to go down in quality a little bit. After 20 decisions, your ability to make a good and reasonable, or in aviation, a safe decision, goes down even further. After 30 decisions, and this study is actually in a day, after 30 decisions in a day, your decision quality gets even farther down. In fact, some of the most successful people only wear one outfit. Like, no kidding, like Mark Zuckerberg is known for having like 2 or 3 outfits, and that's all he ever wears. Because picking out clothing in the morning is a decision he doesn't need to make. So after 30 decisions, the quality of your decisions gets even worse. Well, after making 30 decisions an hour at the end of a 3-hour flight, your decisions get really, really poor. So instead of blaming the poor innocent autopilots, what would happen if autopilots were used correctly and more, not less? Well, the decision fatigue would go down, and that would reduce workload and accidents, even in cruise, and even a little bit on takeoff. So I like quotes. I'm just a kind of a quote guy, and one of my favorite quotes to torment my poor wife with is never keep a dog and bark for yourself. And I just think it's funnier every time I say it. She disagrees with that. But the quote I want to use for you tonight is by me and something I've said for years. Never hand fly an airplane and waste brain power on the simple stuff if you have an autopilot. I'm supposedly this top international expert in single pilot IFR. I get hired for 3-day programs everywhere from Alaska to Australia. People pay me money to come to them and make them great. And everybody always says the same thing. Gary, you make it look so easy. Well, it's not because I'm smart. I mean, maybe a little bit. I don't know. You take a vote at the end of the video. It's because I get paid to do it every day. But I'm this top expert in single pilot IFR. And for 6 years, I had a really nice 206 with the best flight management system you can get, Avidyne, much more capable than a basic GPS system. Had a really nice Aspen panel, and I was hand flying single pilot IFR everywhere I went. And I did okay, but I was always just exhausted at the end of the flight. And then I installed a Genesis 55X Autopilot, and don't ever hand fly. And let me tell you, my approaches are much better. Everything about the flight is more accurate, and I'm not tired at all because I've removed the constant check heading, check altitude, check course. I've removed all those unnecessary steps. So what are some things much more important than hand flying, an altitude, and a course or heading? Run your checklist. Look outside. Check weather. Manage the big picture. And what else? Well, in the earlier live webinar we had hundreds of great suggestions, like review your instrument approaches, manage radio communication, review your clearance. We had all these great ideas. Look at your engine indication. Do you notice your oil is overheating? Like, there are so many things much more important than trying hard just to hold a constant heading, course, and altitude. Let the autopilot do the simple stuff, folks. Big brains go on big stuff. You're the pro. You need to manage the big picture, not the minuscule stuff. So let's talk about autopilots on SIDS and stars. We're first going to look at a standard instrument departure. This is the Muddy 3.Moose transition out of Oklahoma City, if you'd like to pull that up. And almost all SIDS, and I think, a lot of SIDS, but almost every star I know, or every star I've ever seen, typically ends in something called a manual termination, which is just a radar vector. So if we're departing runway 17 right at Oklahoma City, we're going to climb a heading of 176 to 1,800 feet. Then we stay on a heading of 176 or whatever they tell us to fly. And then they expect radar vectors to GLOPS. When are we going to go to GLOPS? No idea. It's when Oak City Tracon says go to GLOPS. So we have to set up for takeoff in heading mode and be ready to go to GPS steering. So let me show you how I do it. So this is the way I would do it in my personal plane. It's a 1966 U-206 with an S-TEC 55X Autopilot, an Avidyne 550, an Avidyne 440, and an aspect panel. It's a very well-equipped airplane. So before my takeoff, I'm holding short of the runway. I'm going to make sure the Autopilot self-test, and I've done the supplement test, and my before takeoff check is complete. I'm going to set my heading bug to 176. Now, really, really important. The departure says fly heading 176, not maintain runway alignment. Runway alignment is a VFR thing. They want me on a heading of 176. If I get blown off for the wind, everybody else is going to get blown the same direction. I don't want to correct and then have problems with other people. Make sure my altitude pre-select is set to 5,000. My vertical speed bug is set to a positive 600. My GPS flight plan is loaded with GLOPS. Waypoint is selected, and I push the direct to button once. The second time confirms it. And my flight director is on if you have one, but I want to make sure my autopilot is off. Now, when can you turn on your autopilot after you take off? Well, as soon as you legally can and it's safe to, you should. Here, a lot of people go, well, you know, I wait till I'm 1,500 feet, or I wait till my flaps are up, I'll wait till I'm 1,000 feet or whatever. Sorry for the drink, folks. My voice is going quickly. I want you to turn it on as soon as you can possibly do it, because the sooner you give control over the simple stuff, the sooner you can run checklist and look outside. So a KAP 140 and a Cessna 172, you have to wait until you're 800 feet above ground level to turn on. The new GFC 500 and like a PA 28 requires you to be 800 feet above ground level. The 55X in my 206, I can turn it on earlier. I only have to be 500 AGL. And the S-TEC 3100 and a 210, you can actually turn on at 200 feet. I was a little surprised. I go, wow, that's really low. But you know, that's when the airlines can turn it on. And they have a 3-pilot crew. They got a pilot flying, a pilot not flying, and they still engage the autopilot as soon as it's safe to do so. So after takeoff, once I'm at 500 feet AGL, I'm going to turn my autopilot on in heading mode, turn on vertical speed, and arm altitude hold. Going to confirm that my altitude pre-select of 5,000 is still there. And then I'm going to run the climb checklist as soon as I verify the autopilot's doing what it should be doing. Once I've left and Oklahoma City says, okay, at this point I want you to go direct GLOPS, I'm going to confirm GPS direct to on GLOPS, and then I'm getting course guidance. I'm going to change the autopilot to GPS steering and confirm the status. Am I still in vertical speed mode? Is my altitude pre-select of 5,000 still armed? And again, run checklist. So this is what it looks like inside my airplane. On my Aspen, before I take off, I'm going to set the heading bug to 176. Going to arm my vertical speed to a positive 600 feet per minute climb. I'm going to arm my altitude pre-select to 5,000. Okay. So let's go ahead and take off. Get a good run and start there. We're accelerating nicely. Now, in this case, I'm 500 feet above ground level on the GPS. That's not what I'm looking at. I'm looking at my certified altimeter to make sure that I am 500 feet above ground level. Sorry, I hit the mic there. At this point, I'm going to push the heading button, which will put me in heading. Now, the most common mistake I see people make with all Autopilot brands is they randomly push buttons too fast. They don't even look what they're doing. You need to be very methodical and very slow. You need to look at what you're pushing. It is critical that you press and hold the vertical speed button, and then, while you're holding the vertical speed button, hit altitude capture. If you stick two fingers out and try and push them at the same time, if the altitude button is pressed a microsecond early, it will reset your pre-selected altitude to your current altitude and immediately level off the plane, which is a bad idea. So I want you to go as slow as you can. You're going to push and hold VS and then push ALT, and it happens just that fast. So you'll actually see vertical speed arm first, and then altitude pre-select is captured. Or it's not captured, it's armed. Sorry about that. Now, when Oklahoma City says, hey, direct LOPS, I'm going to confirm it on the GPS. So you notice I have my waypoint selected. I've pushed the direct to button once. When they say direct LOPS, I'm going to push the nav button twice. So there's direct LOPS, confirm. And now I'm just going to push the nav button twice. The first time goes to nav mode. The second time I push it goes to GPS steering. And of course I would still be in vertical speed and ALT armed. Now the new digital autopilots like the DFC90, the 3100, you simply push nav once and it will automatically go to GPS steering. The advantage of the new digital autopilots like the S-TEC 3100 is it takes out one more button push on a lot of transactions. So some people get a little confused. Well, what's nav and what's GPSS? Well, nav is what we learned back in the dark ages. I learned IFR, you should be on a Victor Airway. Well, that's not true anymore. Most people, you should be GPS direct most of the time. There are exceptions to every rule, but most of the time we want you GPS direct. But before we even had GPS, we would go by a VOR and then correct back. And the autopilot nav mode, that's what it does. Nav is what's called flyby navigation. So you would go past the buoy VOR, turn back and intercept your next course at a 30-degree angle, then correct that and fly it. GPSS actually has an invisible R in the middle. Everybody says GPS steering. It's really GPS roll steering. And what that does is based on your current ground speed and track, it leads the turn, which is much more stabilized and much more efficient. So instead of going past it, it cuts the corner early and is much more efficient and much more stabilized. It's much smoother than my little computer animation can do. So let's talk about stars. We did SIDS, let's talk about stars. Well, I should be in GPS steering and altitude hold at, coming up to WESAT. And you'll notice after WESAT, it is a manual termination, just on a track of 130. So you put your heading bug to 130, and then as soon as you get to WESAT, you just push heading and go back to heading. So we need to talk about some GPS approaches. There's quite a bit of confusion nationwide on the difference between WAAS and non-WAAS, and there are some really fine and critical safety differences between LP and LPV. So I want to go over just a few of those. LP is a WAAS approach that may have plus V advisory vertical guidance. And an LP approach is the RNAV-18 to Galveston, Texas. It is LP, your navigation system, a basic GPS like a Garmin or advanced flight management system like an Avidyne or Bendix King, will create the advisory vertical guidance, the glide slope, glide path for you. Now your autopilot doesn't know the difference between advisory and approved. Approved would be LPV, that's approved vertical guidance, also at Galveston on a runway almost touching the other one. But there is a critical difference between LP plus V and LPV. They are both WAAS approaches. LP is the WAAS. They both start at 1800, except the advisory has an MDA that is 354 feet above ground level. You have to stop higher than the LPV decision altitude, which is only 200 feet above ground level. Well, I don't understand. Well, let's look at the profile. Maybe that'll help. The LP plus V, and here's the LPV profile. Same two approaches. The LP plus V is a 3-degree glide path. The LPV is a 3-degree glide path. The LP plus V has an MDA with a missed approach point at runway 18. The LPV LNAV VNAV you go missed at a decision altitude. Only LNAV has a missed approach point. So why aren't both LPV? We obviously have WAS in Galveston, Texas. Why aren't they both LPV? Well, LP and LPV are completely independent approaches. They are not the same in any way. In fact, it's really important to note that if you lose WAS, LPV will never step down to LP because LP is the WAS. It's the plus V or the V. It's either advisory vertical guidance or approved. It is completely different. So LPV will never step down to LP in a failure. LP is the WAS. So if you lose WAS on an LPV, it's either going to go to LNAV VNAV or LNAV only. So why don't we have LPV to runway 18? Because it wouldn't help. There's obstacles between you and the runway. So the difference between LP plus V and LPV is obstacle clearance. That's why one is advisory and you have to stop high, and one gets you much lower. So what's LNAV VNAV? Well, LNAV VNAV has a decision altitude. You fly it just like an ILS, just like an LPV, but it is not WAS. It is not a digital tightening. It's not as accurate as WAS, which LP stands for Localizer Performance, by the way. It's not as accurate, so it typically only gets you down to about 400, 500, 600 feet above ground level. Now, what's interesting is sometimes LNAV gets you lower than LNAV VNAV, but you do fly it like an ILS. You go missed at a decision altitude. You don't level off at a minimum descent altitude and then fly forward to the missed approach point. So I want to make sure that y'all are clear, and I want to show you how to use an autopilot on an LP plus V approach. This happens to be the RNAV 13 at Ardmore, Oklahoma. Now, on my way to the procedure turn or course reversal. That is absolutely not a hold. It's never been a hold. It is a course reversal or a holding pattern in lieu of a procedure turn. Just call it a course reversal. It's not a hold. So I'm outside of RD, south of RD apparently, and Fort Worth Center says clear direct RD, maintain at or above 4,000 until established, cleared for the RNAV 13. So I'm in GPS steering, and once I pass RD, I should enable vertical speed of negative 500. Now, before I ever get to RD, I've pre-selected my next altitude of 3,600. So as soon as I'm past RD, I'm going to touch my autopilot, put hold VS, and then push ALT while I'm holding VS. And I'll start my descent down to 3,600. And of course, you reduce power whenever you start a descent. Remember, folks, when the autopilot is flying, power controls speed. When you are hand flying, power controls your altitude. I know there's exceptions to every rule, but trust me, this one's going to work for you most of the time. So we're outbound in the procedure turn, and we're in a vertical speed descent down to 3,600. Going to skip forward a little bit. I'm already at 3,600. I'm now still in GPS steering and altitude hold, but I've pre-selected my next altitude to 2,900. Now you notice I'm not in approach mode at this point. It doesn't do any good. You should not be in approach mode unless your navigator, my Avidyne or Bendix King Flight Management System or a Garmin GPS system, is outputting vertical guidance. It's outputting an approach. So LPV at this point is only armed. I'm still in GPS mode, so I'm still in GPS steering. Flying along. Everything's good. Now remember, this is a 4-flight recording of an actual instrument procedure. There's 30 or 40 knot winds. There's wind shear. You're going to see my altitude go up and down, but remember that's a GPS altitude and an indicated ground speed, not a baro-corrected altimeter and not an indicated airspeed, which is what we fly. This just happens to be a 4-flight recording out of my 4-flight mastery program. Now once I get to RD, as soon as I pass it, I'm going to make sure my heading bug is set to 129 or sync it to whatever course holds me, with the wind on the track. And my altitude has already been pre-selected to 2,900. And as soon as I pass Arty, I'm going to put it in vertical speed of negative 500, but make sure altitude is armed to capture. And never reduce power until you start to pitch down. And there we go. Okay, I'm going to skip forward a little bit more. So I'm at and. Now LPV is active. Now I enable approach mode. By the way, you never had to do that step down from 29 to 28. It's not a required altitude. The 2800 is an at or above altitude. There is almost never a reason to do those little 500 or 600 foot, or in this case, only 100 foot step downs. It's not required. It's an at or above altitude. Once you stay at 2900, you're going to be below the glide path anyway. So when do you go from GPS steering to approach mode? When you see vertical guidance on your PFD or your gauges, the thing coming out of the box, and when I say box, I mean the Avidyne FMS, the Bendix King FMS, or a Garmin GPS, says LP plus V, LPV, VLOC, whatever. It needs to be in approach mode coming out of the box. You need to have lateral and vertical guidance, and you need to be below the glide path. Glide path and glide slope used interchangeably. If all of those things are true, that's when you go to approach mode. And you notice I'm just going to stay there and wait for the glide path to come down. There is no reason to go down to 2800 right there. Now at this point, I've made sure my heading bug is set to 129, or I would sync it to like 140 or whatever with the amazing crosswinds we're fighting right now. Holds me on course. And I've set the altitude pre-select to 3600. Why? Because in altitude hold, or in glide slope or glide path mode, it completely ignores any altitude pre-select. There is no benefit or reason to put my MDA at 1500 because my autopilot wouldn't stop at 1500. It'll just continue tracking that glide slope all the way down to the ground. And if I hit an obstruction, well, I hit an obstruction. So if you want to see what happens when the glide path captures, it'll actually change to GS mode. And remember, GS and glide path, same thing for this discussion. In fact, even the FAA is now using glide path, even on ILS. It's more of an ICAO term. I'm just going to wait until the autopilot automatically captures the glide slope and then pitches down, and then I reduce power. Now you'll notice a wide swing in ground speed. That's because of the winds. The winds were 35 to 45 knots, gusting from the side. There was a lot of wind shear. There was moderate turbulence the whole time. You want to see a cool pro tip? Like, say you really just had to get down from 29 to 2800. Well, you don't. But say you want to show off for an examiner on a check ride. No problem. Let's do that. And we're flying along. You'll notice we're in GPS mode, but LP plus V is on. I'm just going to push the down button 5 times. So a little hard to hear over the engine noise, but basically every time you push the down button on an S-TEC 3100, it'll go down 20 feet. So if you really want to make that 29 to 2800 foot dip, you just push the down button 5 times. But again, anytime you are in approach mode, LPV is coming out of the Avidyne flight management system. I've got vertical guidance on this Aspen display. I'm below glide path. Just go to approach mode. It'll switch to altitude hold, and you're done. At this point, I would then pre-select my altitude to 3600 for the mist. So this is actually a different RNAV 13. This is the RNAV 13, still an LP plus V up at Oklahoma City. And we are approaching the MDA. We're descending. Same day, but the winds were even harder at Oklahoma City. You're going to see us get bounced around a lot. You see big ground speed and airspeed jumps. But I'm in approach and glide slope mode. My altitude is pre-selected to 3,000. Why? Because if I put it to 1,800, it does absolutely no good. There's no benefit. Glide slope will ignore any pre-selected altitude. I don't care what you put in there, it's not going to stop. So I've got my heading bug set to 131, or it's going to be synced to whatever holds me on course. And we're just happily cruising. We're descending a nice and stable path. And this is an S-TEC 3100. It's a digital autopilot. And at this point, we have 49 to 55 knot gusting winds, moderate turbulence, and a little low-level wind shear. And it's doing an amazing job. And we're nice and stable, and we're going in. Everybody's happy. There's traffic. I have him in visual contact. Everything's good. And we're coming up on our MDA of 1,800 feet. And that's a personal minimum. You'll notice on the ForeFlight chart, I put level 1,800. I always round up a little bit. Now, here's the common mistake. Most people at 1,800 will hit altitude hold. That is completely ineffective. That will do you no good at all. If you hit altitude hold in approach mode, it'll just kick back and continue tracking that glide path. It won't even slow down. It'll just continue your descent. It does not help. You actually have to leave approach mode completely. You have to switch out of approach mode to heading and then hit altitude hold. So my student hit altitude hold. That does no good. It continues the descent. Nope. You got to switch out of approach mode completely. You got to hit heading, then altitude hold, which I just did, and now it'll level off. Now at this point, we're just bumping up and down in the winds. One of the reasons I rounded up to 1,800 feet, which is 150 feet above MDA, is to allow students to make little mistakes like this. Now at this point, my heading bug is set to 131 or whatever's holding us on the ground track as best as I can. And I'm going to get ready for the missed approach, which means I'm going to pre-select my altitude of 3,000 and sync my heading bug again with the ground track. Why do I pre-select 3,000? Well, the missed approach says climb to 2,000 and then a climbing right turn to 3,000. Or I'm sorry, it says climb to 1,700, then a climbing right turn. Well, I'm never going to pre-select the stopping altitude because I don't stop at 17. I pre-select to my final altitude of 3,000. You don't level off at 1,700, then do a right turn, then climb. It's a continuous motion. So always pre-select your final altitude in the mist. Remember, sync it with the ground track. And as soon as I pass the missed approach point, I'm going to execute the missed approach. Now I'm already in heading mode, so at this point I can do a fully coupled go around. I'm just going to change it to vertical speed, which I've pre-selected to 600. Holding vertical speed, I'm going to arm my altitude capture. Remember, altitude hold and glide slope ignores pre-selected altitude. That's why you got to set it to 3,000 and be in vertical speed mode to capture it. And this is what it looks like. Flying along. I have initiated the climb. We're just not climbing very well with the winds. And then as soon as you've confirmed the GPS is auto-sequenced to the mist, one of the things I like about the Aviation and VOR flight management system line is they always auto-sequence. Garmin, you got to unsuspend. It's just an extra button I don't think you need to push. Remember, anytime you can eliminate a decision, it just makes life easier. So before you switch back to GPS steering, make sure that you've unsuspended a Garmin device or on an Aviation or flight management system like Bendix King. Aviation or Bendix King is a flight management system. Make sure it's auto-sequenced to the mist. So as long as GPS is coming out of the box and no longer LP plus V, I can now just switch back to GPS steering and it'll start the turn. Now I've combined ILS and LPV into the same demo because you fly them exactly the same way. LPV is more precise. It is more accurate than an antique FM radio transmitter called an ILS. It's not subject to local magnetic interference. It never gets jiggity. It gets tighter, but you never get angular big deflection swings on final, which is why I only do LPV. The only time I'm ever going to shoot an ILS is if GPS or WAS is out. But in this case, we're going to do a vector heading to final. I'm at 5,000 feet, and sorry, bumped the mic. I'm at 5,000 feet, and they say fly this heading, descend and maintain 4,000 till established, cleared for the ILS 17 right, Oak City. So I am in heading mode. I'm in vertical speed of negative 500, but altitude is armed. Since I told to intercept the localizer, and since on my display, in this case a Bendix King AeroView Touch or a G5 or a G500 TXI, whatever, or an old school HSI, as long as I'm approaching final and as long as I'm below the glide slope, I'm going to arm approach. So I'm happily intercepting. And as soon as I'm on that line, it will automatically switch to approach and altitude hold. I've pre-selected altitude of 3,000, not because I want to go down to the step down of 3,000. Remember, if I'm in altitude hold and glide slope is armed, it completely ignores all pre-selected altitudes. I put 3,000 because that's the missed approach. If you look down at the bottom of the missed approach, it's climbed to 2,000, then a climbing right turn to 3,000. So you put the heading bug to the inbound course. I put 174 because of the winds. The magnetic reference bearing on this happens to be 176. But remember, altitude preselects are always ignored if you're in altitude hold, glide slope armed, or glide slope active. So flying along and just waiting, and there's glide slope, and then I wait for it to pitch down, and then I reduce power. I'm not going to show you exactly how to do VOR localizers, but I do want to talk about a couple important notes. One, everything you can, you should do in GPS steering. It is illegal to continue a VOR approach inside the final approach fix, still in GPS steering, still in GPS. And I got a lot of questions on the live webinar about this. Well, I thought it was legal as long as you monitored the VOR. Nope. If you look at the top right of the approach plate, it doesn't say VOR or GPS Bravo. It says VOR Bravo. Strangest decision the government ever made is, I don't know, 15 years ago, you were allowed to just stay in GPS and use GPS steering, which was better on any VOR, localizer back course, NDB, whatever. It was called overlay. Well, they changed their mind and took it out. So it is not legal continue inside the final approach fix, in this case Emily, unless VLOC is coming out of your Garmin GPS or your Avidyne Bendix King FMS. It is not legal to do so even if you're monitoring. And it is a really, really fast way to fail a check ride. Now make sure before you kick over, as soon as you kick over to VLOC, make sure your course is set to the published magnetic reference bearing. In this case, the inbound course is 051, not the GPS desired track. This is one of my favorite training approaches to fly for people on my 3-day training programs, because the GPS, either the Garmin GPS or the Avidyne BK FMS systems, will pre-slew your course needle, the green needle, to 053, because that's what it thinks is more correct. Well, here's the problem. If you're tracking VLOC, VOR or Localizer, and you have your course needle set to 053, that's not going to work on a VOR approach. So make sure anytime you're on a VOR or Localizer back course that the course needle is set to the published magnetic reference bearing, the number on the chart, in this case 051, not the GPS desired track. And instead of pre-selecting multiple altitude preselects, going vertical speed, arm altitude capture, I don't even bother. I just put it in negative vertical speed of 800, and then when I get to my next altitude, I hit altitude hold. If it's only a couple hundred feet, I go negative 500 feet, then I hit altitude hold. It is easier just to hit vertical speed, go down, altitude hold, vertical speed down, altitude hold, vertical speed down, altitude hold, than to keep changing your altitude pre-select. It's less work. So before I get to Emily, I need to switch to VLOC, and then I'm just going to hit vertical speed negative 800. At 1200, you need to stop high. I'm going to hit altitude hold. As soon as I pass Yasui, I'm going to do negative 500, descend to 940, altitude hold, add power. Then I'm going to fly forward to the missed approach point, just like an LP plus V. Remember, plus V means add altitude, stop high, level off. Now, as soon as I've gone past the missed approach point, which in this case is a DME of 5.5, or this is where people get confused, you can use your GPS to show that you've gone past FODIT, unsuspend the Garmin, or Avidyne, of course, will auto switch back. Then I switch back to GPS and GPS steering for all the missed approach, because why would I ever hand fly a VOR approach? Just let the magic of Gary's pink source do all the work. So missed approaches should always be done in GPS and GPS steering. Let's talk about localizer back courses. Absolutely one of my favorite approaches in the country is the Localizer back course runway 3 in Brownsville, Texas. Now if you look in the upper right of the approach plate, you'll notice a really cool thing. The back course actually goes into Mexican airspace, and it's totally legal to do this IFR practice approaches or VFR practice approaches, because this little section of airspace is actually legally controlled by a U.S. approach called Valley Approach. And the Mexican authorities say, look, this little chunk belongs to you, knock yourself out, you can do whatever you want. So you don't need to file any paperwork. I love doing this thing several times because I can cross the border 3 or 4 times in an hour and never have to do any paperwork. I'm not stopping in Mexico, I'm just doing the instrument approaches. So everything is the same, just like a VOR approach. You're going to do outbound in the procedure turn in GPS steering. Of course, inside the final approach fix, in this case CALIA, you need to be in VLOC. And then, of course, the missed approach, I'm certainly not doing an NDB approach by hand. I'm putting it back in Gary's pink source and letting it roll. Now, here's what's interesting. A lot of people are in the habit and trained, and a lot of autopilot manuals say you need to be in reverse mode. You need to be in back course mode. But REV mode may not be necessary or even work depending on what you have between your navigation, a Garmin GPS or an Avidyne FMS, and your autopilot. Because some electronic displays don't put out the label that it's reverse course. So for instance, if you're flying along and you have a digital display and you hit reverse and it starts taking you off course, even though you are in back course, the display is not telling your autopilot you're in the back course. So how do you know? Well, the 3100 will just automatically go into reverse course. So if the 3100 goes into reverse mode, you're supposed to be in reverse mode. If you have an S-TEC 55X or King Autopilot or whatever, try the reverse course and see if it works. If it doesn't work, then just go back to normal approach mode. Okay, so there are some very important limitations and some times when autopilots are prohibited. And this is true for most autopilots in most aircraft configurations. Anytime you're shooting an approach and you have more than a 50% deflection off course or glide path, you are required to disconnect the autopilot. There are always minimum airspeed limitations. I do most approaches between 100 to 120 knots. Some airplanes can do an approach at 150 knots, but I think decisions happen too fast. Some airplanes like to do approaches at 85 or 90 knots. But, autopilots like having a little bit of wind going over the flight controls. You'll find, like in a 210, an approach at 120 knots is pretty good. In Cessna 172, 90 knots is pretty good. You got to give them a little bit of speed. But there are legal minimum airspeed limitations and maximum airspeed limitations. So where are you going to find the 50% deflection? Where are you going to find the minimum and maximum airspeed? When are you going to find the maximum flap limitation? A lot of autopilots have a maximum flaps. Like in a 172, most autopilots only allow 10 degrees flaps. Where are you going to find all these? In the supplement put in your POH, and they are really important to read. Let's do a quick Gary quiz. I love quiz time. I just actually happy that I found neon and pink. True or false, everybody? Are autopilots always allowed on instrument approaches? Well, Gary says yes. Like, why would you hand fly when the autopilot can do it better? But it is actually false. There are a lot of ILS approaches where the autopilot is prohibited below a certain altitude. So in this case, you'll notice I've highlighted in pink that the autopilot coupled approach is not authorized below 1360, which is about 370 feet above the decision altitude. Well, why? Because ILS are antique. It's not a digital signal, it's not LP, it's not WAS. It's an antique FM radio transmitter that sometimes the glide slope can give you wrong or erroneous rapid deflections because of local interference. In fact, why would this happen? It's because of local interference. So what the FAA does is the FAA actually has a rule that says if the glide slope ever goes out of tolerance due to a local disturbance in the signal, the instrument approach must create a chart note, autopilot not authorized, 50 feet above where the condition exists. Well, how do they know? Well, there's a bunch of King Airs that fly around the country painted light blue FAA that are called flight check. What they do is they fly every approach in the country and they're checking these things. A classic example of this, and I don't know what the problem is at Ardmore, but a classic example on an ILS is on short final, the ILS goes over a bunch of railroad tracks, and the iron in the tracks is creating some kind of magnetic disturbance. And if the autopilot is still coupled, you get this wild, quick swing of the glide slope up and down. The autopilot overcorrects. Or you get a wild swing on the localizer, left, right, and the autopilot will overcorrect. That's why it's not safe. So you will not find this note on LPV approaches. They are typically only found on ILSs. Well, what if my autopilot's a little bit older and doesn't have GPS steering? What do I do on procedure turns and holds? Well, A, just buy a new autopilot. Just upgrade to an S-TEC 3100 or whatever you want to upgrade to. That's my answer to everything. Just upgrade, buy newer. Well, okay, that's true, but in the meantime, or if, I don't know, you want to spend money on like food this month or whatever, totally cool. It's really simple. Do procedure turns and holds just using the heading bug. That's the easiest way to do it. All right, true or false? Hand flying is safer than using autopilots because the reason we have so many accidents is because autopilots cause accidents. I hope you all will agree at the end of this video that is totally false statement. Autopilots are much safer than hand flying because they reduce decision fatigue. You're always safer using an autopilot rather than hand flying if the following is true. The pilot has read the complete manual and supplement. The pilot is trained on how to use their autopilot by an expert. So that's one of the reasons people hire me for a 3-day program. It's just because I'm good at all this stuff. But let's say I'm not available or whatever. You just want to work with a local instructor. Before you pick a local instructor to teach you your new autopilot or teach you your new GPS system or teach you your new glass display, it's pretty simple. I want you to interview your flight instructors. If that interview includes, watch a couple YouTube videos and we'll play with it in flight. No. Watching this video or any other video clip doesn't count as expert training. If they say, well, don't worry about it, we'll go play with it in flight. No. If your flight instructor can't teach a minimum of an hour of ground on your new autopilot system, they're not qualified and they're just going to play with buttons and hope something works. And most importantly, the pilot has practiced with a true expert in VMC first. Now let's go back to those videos online. I really appreciate you all watching my videos. There are some other great people out there that do wonderful videos. Please, please be careful. There are a lot of people on Facebook that give bad answers. There are a lot of people on social media that create these training videos that are totally wrong and can hurt you. Before you trust a video, you need to decide what kind of experts they really are. But most importantly, autopilots are always safer if the pilot knows how to turn it off and they still practice hand flying at least once a month. No kidding, I want you to only fly autopilot. I only want you on Gary's Pink Source GPS. But once a month, I take off from my airport in my airplane. I hand fly the departure. I go to a local airport and I hand fly a localizer or a VOR approach by hand and land. Or I'll hand fly a VOR localizer or localizer back course and execute the published missed approach and hold by hand. I do want you to keep your hand flying skills up. I just don't want you to use them if you're busy doing other things. And one of the greatest things you can do is get a simulator and practice for free at home. It doesn't count towards legal approaches, but it certainly keeps you up. So if you want to work with an expert and you decided that expert's me, hi, how are you? Totally happy. I can go anywhere in the world, or you can come here to North Texas for 3 days. It is an exhausting 20-plus hour program where you will know everything about your GPS, FMS, flight display, and autopilot systems. And just when you're totally exhausted at the end, I'm going to turn everything off and make you hand fly an approach down to landing under the hood using ForeFlight only, because you need to be able to use all of the capabilities of ForeFlight, not just a little bit. Now, what's really funny, at least to me, is 6 or 7 hours into the first day. The first day is 8 hours of ground. 6 or 7 hours into the first day, or 6 hours into the flight portion the second day, people will usually look at me and go, wow, you are really smart. You make this stuff look so easy. Well, one of those two things is probably true. You can vote whether you think I'm smart or not, but it is incredibly easy because I get paid to do it every day. A lot of people watching this video do not get paid to do it every day. What's really funny is about half of the people that hire me to come to them and do a 3-day program are 30,000 hour plus working airline pilot flight instructors, because it's differences training. But a master keeps getting better. So here's a final quote from me. Feel free to screenshot this, share it with others. Through disuse and neglect, your brain will forget even the most well-practiced skills. Practicing just a little bit once a week can stop the erosion of critical skills. I bet you all were great at single pilot IFR the day of your IFR check ride. This is why I don't want people to fly VFR. Everyone goes, oh, you think VFR is dangerous? No, I think VFR is dangerous. I mean, yeah, a little bit. It's got a little slightly higher mid-air collision and terrain problem. But statistically, it's not really worth talking about. The reason I never want you to go VFR is because every time you fly VFR, your IFR skills get lost a little bit. Now, if you're not lucky like me where you get paid to do this every day, a home simulator with X-Plane once a week at home for an hour and a half will never count towards legal currency, but it is a great way to keep your IFR skills current. So always depart IFR, always do the full instrument approach, practice missed approach procedures, not because VFR is dangerous, but because you're keeping up your critical skills. So remember, the most important thing of a master flight instructor or a master pilot that knows autopilots are much safer than hand flying is the second it does anything wrong, they know how to turn it off. So the most critical skill you can have is to turn the autopilot off when it does anything wrong. One, just push the AP button. That almost always works. There's almost always an autopilot yoke disconnect button. A lot of autopilots, in fact, everyone I know, that if you change the electric trim, you'll disconnect it. There's usually an autopilot master switch that'll kill it. A lot of people will go, oh, you know, I can pull the autopilot circuit breaker. Look, I gotta tell you, if you push the AP button off, you push the yoke disconnect, you messed with the electric trim, you push the autopilot master, and it's still acting, I wouldn't look for a circuit breaker. I'd just turn the avionics master off. Whoop. If I cut all power to that bus, I guarantee it stops. So listen, if you want to be great, not just good at Avidyne and Bendix King, we have a brand new online mastery program. We've sold thousands of our 3.5 hour training videos over the past several years. Well, we have a brand new one coming out just in a couple of days. Instead of 3.5 hours, it's going to be over 8 hours of training. It's not that I don't appreciate reading a book. I think some books out there are great. It's not that I don't think watching a free couple YouTube videos are great. And it's not that I don't want you to read your manual, but if you want real life pro tips with real in-flight footage, not just dry theory, I recommend our program. And the great thing is it never stops growing. Every single month, there's going to be new quizzes, new in-flight videos. We're going to do specific Avidyne or Bendix King with a bunch of different autopilots to display. You get all the original content for free, and you get a full year access to all the new upgrades. So if you go over to avidynetraining.com, that does expire on May 1st, but the program will always be there. And if you've ever bought one of my training programs before for Avidyne, you'll get a $25 rebate. Even if you bought a USB stick or DVDs 4 years ago, we'll give you a rebate on top of the $50 off discount. Now, our ForeFlight training videos were always like 7.5 or 8 hours. The new online program is going to be over 14 hours. Now, I've already heard from a couple people like, I would never watch 14 hours of training on an iPad program. Well, then you don't know how to work all of the iPad program. Really smart people only know how to work about 20% of ForeFlight. Especially every month, we're going to add all the new updates, new quizzes, real in-flight videos. We're going to talk about traffic. And it never stops growing. It'll always keep current, which we had a problem with our DVDs getting a little long in the tooth. So again, we have a pre-sale. It's $50 off right now, but that $50 off pre-sale expires on May 1st. And if you bought our ForeFlight 6 training videos 7 years ago at Sun and Fun, you'll get an additional $25 rebate. And you can find that over at pilotsafety.org. I just needed the applause. I appreciate it. So, couple important things. Wings credit only happens to people who are on the live webinar. That's a rule with the FAA right now. I'm trying to figure out a workaround. But right now, unless you are on the live webinar for more than half, I can't give you wings credit. And please share this recorded presentation with others on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, TikTok. I don't know all the things. But go share this program if you enjoyed it. And if you have any questions about our Avidyne training, pilotsafety.org, click on Avidyne. If you want to learn more about our ForeFlight training, if you want to learn more about my 3-day master training, if you want to watch a couple more free programs on autopilots and get more details on that, or even if you just want to reach out to me and ask a question. I do have a favor to ask. A lot of people say, thank you, and I'm happy to do all this stuff. But I do want to share with you one thing that makes me happier than anything else on the planet. The thing that makes me happiest is meeting pilots like you that believe in mastery, not minimums. You're a professional pilot. If you're watching this video, you're a professional instructor, you're a professional pilot. So meeting you in person is, no kidding, the thing that brightens my day. So I'm pretty easy to spot. I'm a short guy wearing a bright pink shirt everywhere I live. In fact, I only have bright pink shirts in my closet. I don't have anything else. So if you see me in public, I don't care if I'm at Del Taco, walking through DFW, you see me in Montana one day, or you catch me at a convention, if you'll walk up and say hi and introduce yourself, that's what makes me happy. Hey, Gary, I saw you on this video, and that just makes my day. And the other thing you can do for me, tell others about us. Have everybody visit pilotsafety.org, and most importantly, all of you stay safe, fly safe, and reach out to us anytime we can help. Y'all have a great night. This is Gary, the guy in the pink shirt, GPS Reeves. Y'all fly safe.